Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. We are so happy you are joining us today. My name is Donna Lynch, and I am with the Resource Center for Family Focused Practice, UC Davis. And I am so happy you're all here with us on a Friday morning from 9 to 10. That is some absolute powerhouse showing up today. So I really appreciate that. We have an amazing webinar for you this morning. It is 9 o'clock on the dot. We are going to allow our participants a few minutes to get their registration, sign in, and get here and get resonated. So if you want to grab a cup of coffee, a tea, a water, we've got 2 hours ahead of us with the incomparable Ben Greer, and I cannot wait for you to hear his presentation this morning. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Again, my name is Donna Lynch, and I'm with the Resource Center for Family Focused Practice. And thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Understanding Human Trafficking and Strengthening Our Wraparound Communities Response. I'm really super excited about that. We will be here together from 9 to 11. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have any coworkers in your organization or county who are unable to be here today, you will be able to find this on our website in about a week or two, along with all of the materials that you can pull and download off of our website. So that will be available in the future as well. All right. Good morning. I see so many friends already this morning. Annabelle, good morning. How are you? Matthew, Vanessa, how's it going? I see a couple Matthews. Olive Crust is sharing their sign and login. As we're getting started, if you would go ahead and put your name, your role, your county in chat, and what is your superpower? What is your superpower? I love that one in the field. So I know we have a lot of different representation here this morning, from wraparound to family serving systems, frontline workers, and what is your superpower in the field? We want to see who's here today. All right. Well, it's 9:02. Let's get moving, yeah? All right. Again, my name is Donna Lynch, and on behalf of the Resource Center for Family Focused Practice, UC Davis, I want to welcome you to today's important session, Understanding Human Trafficking and Strengthening Our Wraparound Communities Response. We're so glad to have you here with us, whether you're a wraparound facilitator, a youth or family partner, a care coordinator, a provider from family serving systems, mental health, probation, child welfare. This conversation was designed with you in mind. Again, please introduce yourselves in chat, name, role, county, and what is your superpower? I see him, good listener, always caffeinated. That's me, right? Coffee, energy drink, down for that one. All right, before we dive in, I'm going to go over some housekeeping. These sessions are recorded, so this one specifically is being recorded. We will share this afterwards on our Resource Center for Family Focused Practice website in our wraparound web base under webinars, and you'll find it there. All of our materials that we will drop and share today will also be available for those who were unable to attend this morning. Please, if you need tech support, the amazing, incredible, fantastic James Williams is here. Please, we call it a side quest. So side quest him in the private message and he will assist you with that, or you can absolutely side quest me and I will assist you as well. I do want to mention that Ben does appreciate questions during the presentation. So I welcome you to either use the raise your hand feature, come off mute, or you can pop your question in chat and I can ask it for you. Yeah? All right. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my amazing partner from the California Department of Social Services, Chris Petty, who will briefly share how this collaboration came to life and some high fidelity wraparound resources. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Donna. Thank you for that introduction. Amazing, huh? Wow, it's going to be hard to live up to that one. So let me share with you some information and how we got to the point where we are right now. So I want to take a moment to highlight the tools and resources we've co-developed as CDSS and the RCFFP partners to support high fidelity wraparound work statewide. The wraparound standards were co-created with community and system partners and are the backbone of our California wraparound model. And so when we talk about fidelity, these are the benchmarks we're using to guide implementation. The portal is the central access point for counties and providers to align with the standards and is the platform for county approval and provider certification submission and the review process. James, if we can go to the next slide. All right. So the RCFFP and CDSS partnership is one that's rooted in shared responsibility. So what does that mean? CDSS provides oversight and statewide guidance, while RCFFP brings educational, technical, and operational support. So together, we strengthen local implementation without losing sight of fidelity to the model. RCFFP serves as an extension of CDSS, providing tools, resources that align with the state level expectations while supporting counties with practical implementation guidance. And next slide, James. So let's talk a little bit about technical assistance and coaching. So any county or provider can request support through the RCFFP's website, whether it's implementation troubleshooting, maybe it's fidelity concerns, system alignment, or the certification guidance. Technical assistance and coaching are responsive and aligned with CDSS directions. And next slide, please. As you can see, there are a bunch of resources here. We've included all key links and contact info here so you can easily find the resources mentioned, like the wraparound standards, the certification portal, toolkits, and contact points for support. And one last thing on this next slide is, so if you have policy questions or are looking for state level guidance, you can reach out to us here at CDSS. And you can see that it is the wraparound questions at dss.ca.gov. And I'm sure many of you have used that already. So feel free to reach out to us if you're looking for guidance. And then also for any training tools or TA, you can contact the Resource Center for Family Focused Practice directly. And again, on your screen, you can see the email is right there for you as well. All right, that's what I wanted to share. And I'm going to kick it back to Donna.
Thank you so much, Chris. I also did drop a PDF version of this slide deck for you. So all of the links and resources and email are there and provided for you. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kayla from CDSS Family Centered Practice Unit, who will introduce our session focus and the incredible presenter joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Donna. So as Donna mentioned, my name is Kayla, and I'm an analyst at the California Department of Social Services. And I'm honored to be here with you all today and help guide us through this important session. The California Department of Social Services and the Resource for Center Family, sorry, I always butcher it.
It's a mouthful, Kayla.
The Resource Center for Family Focused Practice are committed to supporting cross-system collaborations, especially when it comes to serving youth and families. This webinar represents one of many ways we're working together to bring meaningful, responsive education to the field. Human trafficking is something we see far too often in our systems, and this session is to step forward in bringing awareness, language, and tools for real-world applications. I'm grateful to all of you for showing up for this learning, and thankful for our partners at UC Davis for making this happen. On behalf of the California Department of Social Services, in partnership with our Human Trafficking CSEC unit and Resource Center for Family Focused Practice, we are honored to bring you today's important webinar, Understanding Human Trafficking, Strengthening Our Wraparound Communities Response. Human trafficking is deeply complex and often hidden issues affecting youth and families across California. Today's webinar will help us deepen our understandings with a focus on legal frameworks, coercive tactics, and practical human reduction strategies that can integrate into our daily work. We are incredibly fortunate to bring Ben Greer, a nationally respected leader in anti-trafficking laws and policies. Ben brings a wealth of experience and trauma-informed lens that will help us navigate this complex landscape and strengthen our community's capacity to support survivors. This will be an interactive session, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. As Donnie said, put your questions in the chat, raise your hands, and reflect on how these insights can be applied within your teams. And with that, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our presenter, Ben Greer.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone, the whole team, James, Chris, everybody. We have a lot of people on today, which is awesome. And we have what looks like representation all the way up and down the entire state of California. I think Southern California is getting hit with a pretty good heat wave right now. So yeah, I see Stefania, she's nodding. She's like, yeah. So I'm glad we're indoors. I'm glad we can all come together here in this virtual space. So thank you, UC Davis, for that. My name's Ben Greer. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and kind of introduce myself a little more formally. Does everyone see my presentation okay? Awesome. Awesome. One thing I noticed in our introductions in the chat was that a lot of you identified your superpower as in some form of empathy or survivor support, and that is going to be immensely critical to today's conversation, because that is a component that is crucial in our coordinated, holistic approach to anti-trafficking here in California. A little bit about myself. I am an attorney by trade. I started my career about 15 years ago. I was a research attorney at first for the California District Attorneys Association. Shortly thereafter, I joined the California Department of Justice under then Attorney General Kamala Harris. I was a special deputy attorney general for her and the co-chair of California's statewide human trafficking task force. I went to the Department of State Hospitals, where I worked with a lot of our psychiatric patients who are committed for treatment. And about 9 years ago, I joined Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services. At Cal OES, I am technically in their training division. So I help design and implement and instruct our counterterrorism and human trafficking courses for law enforcement and first responders and disaster responders. But Cal OES has a really big footprint in a lot of the different components of our systems across California. We have a very large victim service grant program, which I'm going to briefly talk about later on. We also house what are called fusion centers, and that's our intelligence centers, criminal intelligence centers, in order to contextualize statewide threats. The director of Cal OES, she has a kind of a dual role. She not only is the director of the agency, but because the fusion centers are a part of Cal OES, she also doubles as the Homeland Security Advisor for Governor Newsom. So with my background in human trafficking, they allow me to work with the analysts to help better contextualize the threat that human trafficking poses our citizens and residents here in California. And then, of course, I have all the school stuff too on there, and you can read that. All right, here's where I want to start. We hear about human trafficking all the time. We hear about it in the news. We hear about it in the movies. We hear it from our politicians. On a scrap piece of paper, I want you to jot down, or you could pop it in the chat. Let's put it in the chat. The first three words or phrases that come to your mind when you hear the word or the phrase human trafficking. Let's put that in the chat.
Can you see the chat, Ben, or do you want me to help you out?
Yeah, help me out, please.
Fear, vulnerable youth, online, commercial, young women, power dynamics, prostitution,
Okay.
minor, internet, money, victim, LGBTQ, sex, abuse, teens, control, victims, sadness, young children, exploitation, abuse, trauma,
Ooh, survival. I like
minorities.
that one.
Luring, sneaky, sexual assault, female kids, hurt, held for sex, non-consensual coercion, force, exploitation.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Very common, very common, and not wrong. I think everything that people put in there is applicable. I'm going to approach it with, there's two ways to define something. I can tell you what human trafficking is, and I can tell you what human trafficking isn't. You can be inclusionary in a definition or exclusionary in a definition. So I'm going to give you both perspectives to kind of vector in on what we commonly know human trafficking to be, legally speaking. Often, when I pose this question, how do we define human trafficking? It's many of the components that you guys popped into the chat. I think a lot of the visual depictions that we get through media sometimes is limiting in our understanding of really what human trafficking is and how it can manifest in our clients. And so I think it goes potentially unrecognized or undiagnosed, let's say, in a lot of situations. At the core of human trafficking really is human exploitation. Forcing someone to do something that they don't want to do against their will through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for profit, for somebody else's profit or financial gain. This concept, it's not a new concept, right? We know that's been going on, unfortunately, probably since the beginning of humankind. However, this legal concept of human trafficking is a relatively new legal concept. What do I mean by that? The phrase human trafficking did not enter our lexicon until 1999. We had other terms that we used. Sometimes we called it slavery or chattel slavery or peonage or prostitution. But this larger concept of this dynamic between an exploiter and a victim, the phrase human trafficking really came into our common terminology in around the year 1999 or 2000. The United Nations passed a definition in their protocols, the Palermo Protocols, and we have this hellacious definition. Hellacious. The recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, the abuse of power of a position of vulnerability, or the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation shall include, at a minimum, the exploitation of the prostitution of another, or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. That is an incredibly long definition. I'm not expecting anyone to memorize that definition at all. It is simply forcing someone to do something against their will through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for someone else's financial benefit. There's a whole host of legal reasons why the United States doesn't always sign on to United Nations protocols. But in that same year, Congress passed the Trafficking Victims and Protection Act, which in essence codified almost the exact same definition. So that was the first time federally in the United States that we had a federal definition of human trafficking, was 2000. Does anybody want to guess when California, let's put this in the chat. What year do you think California made human trafficking a felony?
(2021,
Oh, 21?
2015,
Well,
2012?
getting closer. 2002, that's a pretty good guess. 24. Oh, Kimberly, you're so jaded. All right, so our legislation was passed in 2006, but it went into effect in 2008. So 2008, we were one of the first states to make it, to make human trafficking a felony. I think Wyoming was the 50th state to make it a felony in 2017. So from a legal standpoint, it's only been a felony for 15, 17 years. So it's still a pretty new legal concept. And so we find a lot of our criminal justice systems, including our victim service systems, are still struggling to figure out how to match the needs of our victims and how to fully hold the traffickers accountable. And then again, there's your back pocket definition for human trafficking. I always say, like, if you're at the grocery store, you're at the mailbox, you're talking to your neighbor, and trafficking comes up, this is the definition that I would like for you to remember. It's the business of inducing a person to perform labor or engage in prostitution through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. It's a lot easier to remember than that giant paragraph, but it has all the same components in it. So I had mentioned there's two ways to define trafficking. So first, I gave you a definition of what it is. Now, let's talk about what it's not. And too often, human trafficking and human smuggling get confused. They're sometimes used as synonyms, and they most certainly are not. In fact, if we analyze them, there is no overlap whatsoever between the two. Human smuggling is only a federal crime, and it's a misdemeanor at that. Where we know, as we just said, human trafficking is both a state and a federal felony. Smuggling is a willful action. It's an individual who crosses an international border. Human trafficking is non-consensual. You're forcing someone to do something against their will, but it does not require a crossing of an international border. Who's the aggrieved party? In smuggling, it's the nation that had their borders' sovereignty violated. In trafficking, it's the individual that was forced to do something that they didn't want to. There was a high-profile case a few years ago down in Camp Pendleton in San Diego near the U.S.-Mexico border. And there were 16 Marines that were accused of, and depending on which newspapers you read, it was either human smuggling or human trafficking. And the media was using these terms as synonyms. So it was incredibly confusing to really understand what was going on. Now, the facts that I was able to garner, the Marines knew where Border Patrol was, and they, for a fee, they were bringing people in from outside the United States without legal documents, which in my mind would be classified as smuggling. But depending on which newspaper or which media outlets you were reading, they were calling it trafficking. And so it's very difficult for our public to understand the difference between these two. Either it is, sometimes they are used for, the different terms are used for political purposes, which frustrates me because there is a clear legal difference between the two. And so I don't necessarily blame the public for being confused, because we do a really poor job of clarifying the difference. Do we have a question in the chat there, Danae? No,
It's
that
like
was
I'm
just
new.
just the handouts.
I
Okay.
haven't seen one yet.
All right, fair enough. Now, one question I get often is, well, can human smuggling turn into trafficking? Let's say someone had paid a fee to get into the United States, and then once they were here, the deal changed, and that smuggler now is requiring additional money either to be worked off or in some way paid for before their release. I would say that in that scenario, I think the trafficker always intended it to be trafficking from the beginning. It was never a willful action to begin with. And so it was trafficking by fraud is how I would address that. We're going to look at the California legal structure here in a second. There's a lot of different ways, different methods or ways that trafficking may manifest itself. We have, and this is just one chart. There's numerous charts out there, but this is just one that kind of looks at forced labor, forced marriage, forced labor, state-imposed forced labor. What do I mean by that? Countries like North Korea and China that have forced labor prisons. Generally speaking, we don't have that here in the United States. And then at the bottom, the two gray boxes, forced and exploited labor, and then forced commercial sexual exploitation. A vast majority of our resources and our effort, our attention has been on the forced commercial sexual exploitation, and even more specific of minors. We do not do a very good job at identifying, investigating, and prosecuting forced and exploited labor. It's a very different skill set than commercial sex for the practitioners. And as a general statement, we are behind the curve on being effective against that form of victimization. We're getting better, but we're still significantly behind the curve. Any questions? I've covered a little bit of ground now. Any questions from the audience on anything I've covered so far?
Any considerations or thoughts? I do want to say that I really appreciate Trace. If I'm saying your name incorrectly, I apologize. Acknowledging and bringing forward our overexposed Native American population and our tribal community. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. I had done a presentation actually last year around some of the criminal justice jurisdictional issues about investigating these crimes and other MMIW plus crimes in Indian country. When I was at the Cal DOJ, I worked with the Office of Native American Affairs and the California Tribal Council to kind of research some of these topics. And as many of you here in the Zoom today know, it is alarming the increased rates of sexual assault and other types of crimes against our tribal partners. And it is something that is sorely overlooked and needs to be addressed. And I know, Danae, some of the other components of UC Davis have started trainings specifically on this topic. So So Trace, look out for those as well in the near future.
And I did see Trace come off mute, and I welcome you to come on in if you had a thought or a
Absolutely.
consideration
Please
or
share.
something you'd like to add to the conversation.
So, good morning. So here in Humboldt, up north, we're really close to the Oregon border, close to I-5, 101, and we have several tribes up here, and we've had many Native American girls and boys go missing up here. And it's a big epidemic, especially for our young Native youth. Some of our tribes are way up.
Oh, Tracy went on mute, and your technology is not being kind to you this morning either, but I did hear that you're up there in Humboldt County, up by the Oregon border, and a lot of your Native American youth, both female and male, young people are coming up missing.
One thing that is, I absolutely echo everything and the sentiment that I think that she was conveying. One thing that's interesting is, so Riverside County will be starting a fusion center very soon, if not this month. And for one of the first times in the state of California, they're gonna have a tribal liaison component. And so hopefully we can start to share some of the information and intel that we have from our tribal communities so we can better understand, one, what's going on, but then two, how can we redesign or update our systems to better address evolving or emerging threats. So I'm hopeful that we can start to make some gains in some of those areas. Any other questions? Thank you for that share.
Absolutely.
All right. This is one analytical tool that we use to analyze a fact pattern to see if human trafficking may be present. We call it the AMP model, the action, means, and purpose. In short, you need a fact or an element of each one of these three buckets before we can start to suspect human trafficking. So actions, recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining an individual. By what means did they do that? Force, fraud, or coercion? And what was the purpose? Commercial sex acts or labor or services? It looks pretty simple, but a lot of understanding this crime and how our survivors and our victims are afflicted, it comes down to incredibly subtle nuance. And so it really is that superpower that you guys all listed, that compassionate understanding and empathetic superpower, which will help us drill down to understand actually what the criminal activity is. When we're dealing with a minor, there's a difference. This is what we call our CSEC, or Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children model. There's two differences. Can someone point them out? What are the two differences? So this is the CSEC model. And this is I'll call it the full model or adult model. Okay, the purpose is different. Lori Lynn pointed that out. It only applies to commercial sex, yes. But what's the big obvious one? There you go, Nina, the means. The means. All right, here is the $1 million question of the day. If I'm a prosecutor and I have a victim who is a minor, and in California, that's under the age of 18. Why do I not have to show force, fraud, or coercion. What would be the legal rationale for that? It's more advantageous for me as a prosecutor because that's one less element that I have to prove.
Age.
Their age, yes. They cannot provide consent. Minors legally cannot sign a contract. So, because they cannot consent, form legal consent, as a prosecutor, I don't have to prove that they were tricked somehow. Okay? That is incredibly advantageous because the stickiest part of this whole analysis is generally coercion. Coercion is incredibly nuanced. What is coercive for Danae may not be coercive to me. And so for law enforcement, it takes a lot of time and understanding and rapport with that survivor to try to understand the coercive nature of that relationship. If we have a minor, I don't even have to do that. I just have to show that there was an action and a purpose, commercial sex, and that's the ball game. For the first 15, 20 years of prosecuting this crime, that's where we have lived because it was really close to the goal line and it was easy to get either plea deals or convictions. But we know that criminals are evil. They're not stupid. And however, they're always greedy. So they have started to get a little smarter and they're no longer, we will still find victims that are minors, but statistically, we're starting to see more and more victims that are of 18 years or older because of our successes in these prosecutions. Yes, Danae.
Yes, we have a question for Michelle. How much training is law enforcement getting in this specific area?
Great question.
I can kind of elaborate just because I was recently, I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with the RAD movement. I know it's real big down in San Diego. They do a lot of work with finding our missing youth, particularly those who have, are being potentially trafficked, very high risk. And with my conversation with her yesterday is that we're finding like a lot of the sheriffs like are just doing, oh, well, this is, especially our younger sheriffs, our newer ones. Oh, they're the perpetrator. They're not the victim. They're willingly doing this because they're a frequent runaway. To be frank, that really pissed me off yesterday when I was hearing that.
It would make me upset too.
Especially like a lot of our children, like, because I'm an AAP, so post-adoption services in our county. So a lot of the children that, have been in that foster care they're already very high risk to begin with.
Yep.
And then with law enforcement, putting this tag on them of, oh, they're just frequent runaways. They're wanting to do this. They're not, they're choosing to do so. And then having, our quote unquote, like pimps also be underage. It makes it even harder that to, because they're not being like, there's no coercion needed for minors, but like it's another minor that's doing all of this. But it just made me really mad to hear yesterday that our law enforcement agencies, particularly our younger law enforcement, are, still viewing them as the ones that are committing this crime versus the ones that are having this done to them, and they're kind of going along with it because they're getting money, they're getting the love, the attachment issues that are going on with so many other things. So that was just like kind of the background of why, like, what is the specific training that our local agencies, I know we have the human trafficking task force and other more knowledgeable ones, but just our general law enforcement. And I know some of our communities are much smaller. I live in San Diego, so our community is huge. But some of the more rural, like, what are they getting to change this mindset when clearly it's been 20 years of it being.
Donna, I didn't see who the speaker was. I didn't see their name, but that was
Michelle.
Excellent question. The short answer is very little, unfortunately. And that's the quick answer. There's two things that frustrate me to no end. similar to you, I can tell. That perspective that they are willing, they're doing this willingly, somehow they consented to it. The law is abundantly clear that that is irrelevant. That is not an issue. And then the other thing that is quite frustrating to me, touching back on our tribal communities, when I hear sheriffs say, "Oh, that's occurring in Indian country. That's a family issue. That's not my," 100% legally incorrect. Since 1954, with Public Law 280, it is the sheriff's duty and obligation to enforce California Penal Code equally in Indian country. And whether it is ignorance or willful ignorance, it needs to change across the board. That is one of my missions at Cal OES, is to better inform our decision makers, because a lot of this, there are mandates for trainings in regulations. However, there are no penalties if you don't do the training. So it's mandated in the training, but there's no punishment if you don't do it. So guess what happens? It doesn't get done. So I'm working with executives from the top down to try to get buy-in, a holistic buy-in from leadership in order to get the masses trained. Yes, sir, Mr. Alexander.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And just to kind of piggyback that, I feel for me, I know down here in the valley where we are, I mean, I guess all around, at the end of the day, I just feel like the trainings that we need and the things that we need to be doing to combat this situation that's been going on clearly for a very long time. But the bottom line is, sir, with all due respect, is they see it, but if it doesn't affect them right at home, no one moves on it. No one moves on it. If it doesn't affect you in your backyard, it goes back to what you just said previously, that, oh, that's an issue for them. That is a choice for them. And no one's moving on that. And that's I think that's what my frustration is. Because we see it, and when we do have the trainings or whatever trainings we have that I've seen, it's almost like checking the box training. Oh, we did have a training on trafficking. We did have a training on, but never the whys and how we're doing it now, the in-depth, the whys and the meanings and what we're talking about, the difference between trafficking and smuggling. None of that's ever happened. So I can appreciate that, but in a broad sense, that's what it is, sir. That is checking the box to say, oh, we did it. But it's not really a level of importance because it's not in their backyard.
I would agree with you, sir. As an instructor for Cal OES, for me, that's a challenge, right? Sure. Because then I have to figure out, excuse my words, but what is their give a shit moment? And so then I have to figure out how to integrate that into this discussion. One of the things that we find about human trafficking is that it really is a polycriminal activity. You may be investigating human trafficking, but you may also find other criminal activity, be it drug trafficking, be it weapons trafficking, be it gang activity or organized crime. So if I can link trafficking to something that decision maker cares about, maybe it's not trafficking, but maybe that's my gateway to get to the topic that they do care about. At the end of the day, as long as I get to the finish line and I get this information in the hands of the people that can do the good work, I consider that a win. Does that make sense? Any other questions? I love the organic conversation, guys. Keep it coming. Don't worry about the times in my slides and all that stuff. Keep the organic conversation coming.
Ben, I do want to say that Laura Lynn did make a comment that the tribes are sovereign, therefore at times law enforcement does not get involved.
But what's awesome about that, yes. What's awesome about that is, and I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I think you'll appreciate this. There are 4 different legal systems in the United States. You have the federal legal system, the state legal system, the tribal legal system, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Okay? Given the right set of facts, a person can be held in trial in all four courtrooms for the same set of facts, and it's not double jeopardy because they're separate legal systems. So if there was a tribal court that wanted to, they could also prosecute. And under the Tribal Law and Order Act, I think up to 3 years incarceration for certain crimes, major crimes in Indian country. So it also provides additional opportunities if we can design and align our systems. Here we have our state human trafficking code section, which is Penal Code 236.1. Like I said, it passed in 2006, went into effect in 2008. Quite frankly, it's pretty weak in its punishment, quite frankly. There's a whole host of reasons why legislatively the penalty is relatively low. Primarily having to do with the legislature's reluctance to exacerbate prison overcrowding. That really reduces a lot of the penal sentence. But in 2012, Proposition 35, the people voted and said, nope, we want this crime to have harsher sentencing. And so if we have a minor and we're talking about commercial sex and there is great bodily harm or some other aggravating factors, the trafficker can get 15 to life. But again, that was passed because of a voter initiative, not because of the legislature. Very complex when we get into the policy around some of these issues. Very complex. Again, our California code, very similar. You know, we're lawyers, so we get paid by the word. So we start putting words back into statutes and we start getting that bigger definition again. Force, fear, fraud, deceit, coercion, violence, duress. Again, it's all very similar, force, fraud, or coercion. One thing that is unique, and only 2 of the 4 border states, I think it's California and New Mexico, under the purpose section, they have commercial sex, they have forced and exploited labor, but we also include Penal Code 518, which is extortion. And extortion covers that scenario that I mentioned earlier. It started out as smuggling, but now I'm going to extort you for more money, and it's converted over to trafficking. So that was our legislators' intent to kind of clarify that gray area. Yeah, Donna.
Yes. Joy has a question. She wanted to understand why labor services is missing from the purpose column of the AMP model in the case of children. Is this something based off of evidence?
All right, so great question. Incredibly difficult answer. We have action, means, and purpose, right? If I don't need to show means, if I'm dealing with a minor, but we have labor as a purpose, a minor could never have a job. A minor could not deliver pizzas because Pizza Hut recruited them for a job and they're working and they're paying a decent wage, but human trafficking says, I don't need to show force, fraud, or coercion. So when it's labor and it's a minor, you still need to show force, fraud, or coercion. Otherwise, a minor could never have a legal job. Does that make sense? In the labor law, it gets really messy. Hopefully that answered the question. Put in the chat if it did. If it didn't, I'll try again.
Yeah, hi, Jyoti here. Thanks for the answer. I am kind of still trying to wrap my head around it. But yeah, it did make sense to some extent. But yeah, if I come up with another point, I'll maybe pop it up in the chat box. But yeah, thanks for the response.
Ms. Jerry?
No. Yeah, please do. Please do. All right. And then similar under California Code section, action means purpose. Consent clearly is not a defense. And so when I hear
Ms.
long,
Jerry? Okay, I'm sorry. I put the volume down because how I told you I was on Zoom. Yeah, yes, I was on that. I had mentioned to you about that human trafficking with UC Davis, the what is it, like the webinar?
we're okay. Hey, Jix,
Got it. I found her with
We're good.
153 participants. It took me a minute. Sorry,
Hey,
everyone.
Hey, I like that because you know what? She's recruiting for the next one. She's
Right.
calling her friend and says, "Hey, come jump on this
You
webinar."
gotta get on here.
I
I
like
love it. Sorry, everyone.
No, we're good. Case law is abundantly clear that consent of the victim is not a defense. So when I hear law enforcement say, "Oh, he or she did it willingly," bullshit. That doesn't play here. That's not a thing. Let's talk about the scope of the problem. How big? What is the prevalence of human trafficking? You're going to see a lot of numbers out there. And the more I study, the more I dig into the methodology of these studies, I get more and more confused every day. You will see extremely large numbers. From the International Labor Organization, they estimate 21 million. From Professor Bales and Free the Slaves, 27. And another global study up to 40 million. Annual profits of estimates of $150 billion a year annually. It becomes incredibly difficult, especially statistically, the estimates are labor trafficking is about 9 times more prevalent than commercial sex. How am I supposed to try to estimate the victims of labor trafficking in India when they have the cultural caste system? It becomes incredibly difficult when we're overlaying culture over some of these analyses. Those types of trafficking, labor and commercial sex, are fundamentally very, very different. Commercial sex is very public facing because the trafficker is always looking for their next buyer of sex. So it needs to be visible to the public in order to operate. Labor trafficking, once I coerce or I entice that victim, that person may be working in the back of a restaurant, or that person may be working in the basement of my house, or out in the agricultural field or on a construction site, and the public may never see them again. So it's very difficult to identify some of that, even though statistically we estimate that it's more prevalent. So visibility and prevalence is a sticking point for us to understand. It's a challenge for me to kind of contextualize when I brief decision makers at Cal OES. Now that we're coming into our 3rd decade in our anti-trafficking response, there's a lot of things that we thought we knew, or that the threat has kind of changed or evolved. If you do reading on this topic, in the early years, we saw a lot of data that said the victims or the survivors, especially with commercial sex, they may have entered the life somewhere in the 11 to 13-year-old range. That's incredibly young. I think more recently, the cases that I've seen, the task forces that I've spoken with, we're starting to see kind of a migration to an older victim, more in the 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old. I don't know if that's in response to our prosecutorial practices, if that's in response to the change in technology and how they can interact with their victims and groom their victims through social media. There's a lot of different factors that get rolled into that, but these are some of the trends that we're seeing. Again, labor trafficking, depending on the type of labor, can really impact the gender or the capabilities of the victim. If we're dealing with a lot of manual labor, it's probably typically more often to be a male. Domestic work, maybe not. Domestic servitude, things around of those nature. There was a big case in the Bay Area a few years ago with a nursing home and childcare center. And those, I believe those victims were Vietnamese and primarily women. So it really, really is across the board. And almost every sector, if we come to it with open eyes, we will find exploitation. Any questions on some of those concepts? Traffickers are master manipulators. They will seek out vulnerability for leverage. They will be the source of whatever's missing in their victim's life, be it love and affection, be it economic opportunity, be it education and upward mobility. They will offer all of these things, but they come at a price. And it comes at their exploitation. The trafficker will give and take these things in order to maintain compliance and control over their victim. A lot of this probably sounds similar to kind of the push and pull factors that we talk about when we talk about migration. But they absolutely apply when we talk about the interdynamics between a trafficker and that survivor. People will put themselves in very risky, precarious positions in order to fill those basic Maslow's hierarchy needs. The food, water, shelter, safety, and security. When we talk about some push factors, and remember, trafficking does not require crossing an international border. If I grew up in a part of our community that was incredibly impoverished or rural or even urban, and I didn't see a lot of economic opportunity, I'm going to look for that opportunity elsewhere. And that trafficker is more than willing to use that as leverage when it comes to their exploitative tactics. Sexual abuse and trauma. Someone put survival earlier in the introduction, and I loved that. That was great. Gender, racial discrimination. Someone had there earlier LGBTQ issues. These are all areas that we have seen cases where traffickers will exploit those needs in their victims. And then again, we have pull factors. Everyone wants a better life for them and their kids. And they will go out of their way at their own risk, at their own harm, to improve the life of their children and themselves. Again, traffickers are there, ready, willing, and able to take advantage of that vulnerability. We talked about LGBTQ. Another area that is kind of new on the discussion topic is young men and boys. There was a study done by the US State Department about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a very simple question. can men be victims of human trafficking? And almost 70% of the respondents either said no or I don't know. I'm not sure. Because they see it as a power and control dynamic. And they assume that it's physical. I think most people assume that it's a physical power and control, where a lot of our vulnerabilities are being exploited through coercion. It may be coercion through, if you are a part of the LGBT community, I'm going to tell your parents, you're going to be ostracized, you're going to get kicked out of your social circle or your friends, otherwise, or do what I say. It could be your documented status. Maybe you're undocumented. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to report you to the authorities. These are all coercive tactics that are not physical in nature. Mental health issues. There was an alarming number of cases where traffickers would specifically target and exploit people that had developmental challenges, because they could trick them into believing that they signed a sex slave contract and that they had to perform for the trafficker because they had this legal binding contract, which was all BS. They're evil, they're not stupid. And they are master manipulators. So like I said, a whole host of social and individual risk factors. I touched upon the boys, minority groups. Any questions on these topics? I mean, I know these are really large topics that we can pick any one of these and talk about them for 2 or 3 hours, but I'm just kind of giving you a general overview here. Any questions? This is why, to the earlier question, Donna, sometimes it's very challenging for local law enforcement to try to understand all of these issues that are in our communities. It's imperative that they do. It is incumbent in their job that they do, but it is a very daunting task to try to understand that. That's one of the reasons why we need strong community partners. And so that maybe you don't have that knowledge, but you can team up with a trusted partner who helps bring that knowledge to you.
And what would that look like, Ben? Could you expand on that? So if I, as a parent partner, if I'm working alongside a caregiver and, our youth is currently being trafficked, what does that look like where I can find support for the family and my team?
So there are a lot of state-funded and privately funded community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations that are doing some really good work in this space across the state. Cal OES funds a whole host of domestic violence and anti-trafficking service providers. And I'm curious if anyone on the call today is a subrecipient of any of the Cal OES grants. If you are, pop your name into the chat. One of the unique things that the way that we have decided to design our anti-trafficking task forces is that we have partnered law enforcement with a service provider through our grant structure. So they are seen as co-equal partners in the task force. Where if we talk about other law enforcement task forces, gang task force, drug task force, whatever, they may work with community partners, but by rule, they're not co-equal partners, if that makes any sense. But we realize that in this particular space, when law enforcement identifies victims or survivors, we also need to bring services. And so we have those community partners. Those community partners also work outside of that law enforcement framework with the families. We have some survivors that are parents, right? They may have children with their trafficker, which is an incredibly complex dynamic that has its own legal ramifications, but it also has that service, that support challenge in that how do you address that person's individual dynamic with their trafficker? It's not just prosecution, it's not just a legal context, but it's also a parentage context as well.
And I love what Christy just put in the chat too, because when anything happens within pulp culture or the community, or is very heightened within our media, she referenced P. Diddy. And do you think that heightened discussion about this topic will cause an increase in legal accountability? Is a question in regard to that.
The reason I pause is because first off, it's a great question. The reason I pause is because I would say yes, but I would have thought so after R. Kelly.
Oh yeah. Right.
That's why I paused, because we had the R. Kelly, which is pretty similar. And we fell right back into our old routines afterwards. So my answer to you is I hope so.
Right.
But I don't know.
Because we forget in a flash.
Because then Epstein pops up, and then something else pops up, and then we're on to the next shiny object.
Yeah.
So I hope so. But I'm not confident. How's that for a jaded answer?
Yeah. Fair.
But it's facts.
Fair.
It's facts,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
What
R. Kelly
do you
was an
think?
incredibly high-profile case. Sean Combs is probably more high-profile, but we'll see. And because it takes years to play out, it got the big splash during the arrest, but who knows what it's going to look like, 2 years from now, whenever there's a resolution to the case.
Christy, please. I saw that you came on mute.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, like with Epstein, it started a whole Me Too movement, and there was, I think, a lot of like policy changes that's happened as a result, which has been a good movement. What do you think it would take, like, for this being heightened a little bit more in culture, for people to understand the victims of this and to understand like better checks and balances?
I love the question, and I'll circle back to, and I don't remember which speaker it was earlier. It might have been Mr. Alexander. Honestly, I think it'll take one of our elected officials to be personally affected. Because when they're personally affected, now all of a sudden they're going to run this thing to the ground. And it's no longer a political issue, it's a personal issue. Unfortunately, we've seen that in other areas of public policy, that when an elected official, be it a senator, be it a governor, lieutenant governor, whenever they're personally affected, now all of a sudden that goes to the top of the agenda. Yeah, Donnie?
Yeah, Blanca has a question. What are the thoughts and feelings about legislation not including 16 and 17-year-old, not a felony for perps here in California? Are there any organization working towards including 16 and 17-year-old youth?
All right, so a little background on that piece of legislation. So currently, that 16 and 17-year-olds can be charged, or the perpetrators can be charged as a felony. It's what we call as a wobbler. So the prosecutor, depending on the facts, can charge it as a felony or a misdemeanor. And it would be a Class A misdemeanor. The reason that bill originally stopped movement in the legislature was, I believe, the general underpinning of not wanting to exacerbate prison population in California. It is incredibly difficult in California to increase prison time because of our situation. If anyone doesn't know, since the 1980s, our prison system has been under federal receivership because of our overpopulation of our prisons, civil rights violations, all kinds of other things. I think at one point we were 260% of capacity in our prisons. I think we're now down to about 130% of capacity over 30 plus years. So the legislature, and we're from out of our general fund, because of this receivership, I think we pay $4 or $5 billion a year as a part of compliance. So it's very high on their sensitivity list. That's why I think the bill originally stopped, but because of political pressure, it's now moving again. So that may actually be successful. My perspective, and while yes, I want the traffickers to get as much possible time as we can stack on them, I also want to focus on the root cause, which is their financial benefit. I want to go after the money. I want to make this crime less profitable. Okay? Yes, disincentive, go to jail. But if the crime ain't worth the money, bad guys are going to do bad things. They'll do something else, and I'll try to catch them over there too. But how about we just leave people alone? Right? And so I think there's other ways in the law through asset forfeiture, getting better at restitution, helping the victims get paid for their stolen wages. I think there's other ways that we can make the crime more impactful to the trafficker. That's not necessarily prison time. I want to do that too, but I think we can really tighten up and be more aggressive on the money. I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but it factors into this discussion. Again, I think most of us recognize this as the Maslow's hierarchy. Sometimes I refer to this as the trafficker's playground. These are all their leverage points. And based off of an individual, based off of a set of circumstances, the trafficker is willing to give those basic needs, that safety and psychological needs, in order to maintain compliance and control over their victims. Polaris is a nationally funded organization. They've been doing work in the human trafficking space since about 2003 or 4. They've adapted the traditional domestic violence power and control wheel with some of the dynamics that we know around human trafficking. And they've created this particular adaptation. And in here, and you'll have a PDF of this presentation, and you can look at all the different scenarios that are listed. But it kind of breaks down that nuance that I talk about of coercion. When we talk about isolation, isolation is not necessarily a geographical inference. It is a psychological inference. I can have a victim in the middle of San Francisco or a victim in the middle of Los Angeles, and if they feel isolated from whatever their need is, whatever that resource is that they need, they can be effectively isolated. They don't have to be rurally isolated up in Del Norte County or Susanville or geographically isolated. So traffickers know this, and so they do ways to break contact with the victim and their family. That's one way to isolate them from their friends, isolate them from their support network. That way, the trafficker becomes their sole source of support. They are completely reliant on the trafficker for all aspects of their life. And then, of course, the trafficker gives and takes in order to maintain compliance and through that coercive relationship. That's just one of many, many, many scenarios on here. So I encourage you after the class, take a few minutes, read through some of the bullet points on this slide. And again, if you have any questions on this stuff, email me. We're gonna give you my email or my contact at the end, and I'm happy to discuss any of these points at greater depth with you guys later. All right, question for the class in the chat. In 2012, I helped Attorney General Harris write the state of human trafficking in California. That was the last time, by the way, 13 years ago, that we had a state level authoritative report on human trafficking in California. So we are long overdue for some state agency, CDSS or Cal OES, to step up and help better educate where we are today. But I'm working on that on my day job. I'm trying to push my agency. But one of the things that we first identified, what do you think? What percentage of victims that we identified in 2012 were U.S. citizens? Let's see in the chat. I want to see some numbers.
Can you repeat the question, Ben?
Yeah. I'm sorry, what, you had a question?
No, repeat the question for the percentage in the chat.
It's up, yes, it's up on the slide. What percentage of
thank you.
California human trafficking victims are U.S. citizens?
Got it.
No, it's all good. It gave me a chance to repeat it. I like it.
Yeah.
Oh, not high. 60, 75. I think I saw 50, 80, 90. See, Danae, when you bring me smart people, my traps that I try to build into these, they don't work when you bring me smart people.
Not with my people. No way. My people show up and show out.
I like it.
Right?
I will tell you, first off, you guys are darn close. When I ask most people, it's usually a small number. They usually guess 40% or lower. Okay? Our number was 72%. 72% of the victims we identified were citizens or legal permanent residents. Nationally, that number pretty much holds true across the United States. Some may be a little higher, closer to 80%, but almost every state is in the 70s. Part of the misconception is that the victims we're dealing with are foreign nationals. They come from another country, right? It's kind of that othering that also gives us an excuse to not really care about it because it's kind of happening to somebody else. It's not happening to our own. It's not happening to our own family, right? However, that is not statistically what we have found to be true. Now, do we have victims that are foreign nationals? Absolutely, we do. But they're a statistical minority. And all the data that I have seen, that this number, give or take a few percentages, holds true through all of the 25 years that we've been addressing this problem. Polaris gets congressional funding to do a whole host of things. They do some training. They also operate the national tip line, anonymous tip line. Starting in about 2007, since then, California has originated the most calls out of any state to the tip line. In fact, in this time period, and I've updated it since, California almost equals Texas, Florida, and Ohio combined. Okay. So what does this tell us? What it doesn't tell us is prevalence. I think people will look at this and presume that California has the worst human trafficking problem because we have the most phone calls. That could be true. But what if I told you that California has the most anti-trafficking task forces of any state. We have the most people out there looking for it, so of course we're going to have the most phone calls. Of course we're going to find the most victims. We have about 33 to 34 specialty units across the state. The next closest state is Texas with about 19. Okay. We might have the biggest problem, but I don't want you to presume it. We have one of the more robust anti-trafficking footprints, not only in the United States, but in the world. Any questions on that point? I see Carmen shaking her head. What's going through your head, Carmen?
That's just so disturbing, you know? Just the high number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is just one of the reporting mechanisms.
Mhm.
Local law enforcement, other law enforcement agencies get reports. I mean, if someone were to have me guess, you know, I'm going to say we're in the tens of thousands annually is probably where we're at. It's very, very hard to try to quantify it to an exact number. But that's probably the range that we're in. All right, we have a few minutes left. And so I'm going to do a little exercise here. I went to law school, so I like to call on people, as Carmen just found out. Let's go with Laura Lynn Madison. Ah, she's smiling. She heard me. All right. I'm going to have you analyze this fact pattern. Okay. And then we're going to walk through the AMP model, those 3 buckets that I talked about earlier. And I'm going to have you discuss whether you think human trafficking may be present or not in this fact scenario. So could you read the scenario for us?
Okay. A 17-year-old girl is forced from the age of 15 to have sex with drug dealers in order to pay her parents' debts to the drug dealers. Her parents are arrested on drug-related charges that she is put in the foster care system. She asks to see a doctor who treats her for chronic infections and discovers extensive vaginal damage. She describes what her parents did and states that some situations involved gang rape.
All right. So my first question is to you. Are we dealing with an adult or a minor?
Minor.
Okay. Commercial sex or labor?
Commercial sex.
Okay. So this would be our analytical model right here. It's a minor and we're talking about CSEC. So in the fact pattern, and I can flip back if you want me to, do we have a fact that would support an action? A cause, induce, persuade, or attempt? Let me go back here to the fact pattern. Did the trafficker somehow recruit, harbor, or induce the victim?
They induced her. They need to get their money back. They need that payment. So I would say they induced her.
Okay. Since we're dealing with a minor, do we need to show force, fraud, or coercion?
Yes, because minors don't consent.
Correct. No, that is correct. So the answer would be no.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a fact pattern of commercial sex here?
Yes.
And I would agree with you. Now, if you had this young lady as a client or a patient of yours, what kind of questions would you want to know, or how would your discussion with her go?
First of all, I would talk about, does she have anyone in her life besides her parents? Does she have any support systems? Does she have any safe people, safe person, whether it's family member or not? I want her to feel safe and be safe. Of course, that takes time, but I would ask her, does she have anyone, a safe support system?
We're thinking about wraparound services. What kind of services do you think she may need?
Definitely therapy.
Yeah.
Definitely therapy, definitely some tools we call them coping strategies, but I like to say tools and encouragement guides to help her with her mindset, with letting her know that all of this is not okay. All of this is against her will, and all of it's unsafe and should not have happened.
Okay. Is she still in school? How much school has she missed? What are some of the other foundational aspects of a 17-year-old do we need to help support, right?
Right.
Obviously, we have physical trauma that needs to be addressed through healthcare providers. You mentioned psychological care, counseling, great. I think
And not just basic therapy either. She obviously it's going to start off pretty simplistic. However, I would say in depth, I would say trauma-based therapy. She's had trauma. It says that she's been this started at the age of 15. She's currently 17. So she needs some trauma-based therapy basically because of what she's gone through, the fact that her parents are now out of her life or wherever they're going, and now she's in the foster care system. So all that's trauma. All of it is trauma, not just the act of what the drug dealers have done, but all of it.
Yeah, you had mentioned foster care, right? Because I was gonna go there because her parents are in this complex web as well. So once we remove the trafficker, where is her support system, right? Because
Right.
if her parents were in there, is that a safe and secure place for her to return to?
Right. And it would not be.
Yeah. You had pointed out rightly that the fact pattern says that she had been doing this, potentially for 2 years. We don't know the number of partners that she's been with. I mean, it could easily be in the hundreds.
Right.
That alone is incredibly traumatic and would need significant professional care. Any other questions about that fact pattern? Does this sound like some of the clients that maybe people on the call have had or heard about? Like, I'm not making up crazy fact patterns here. These are people that we interact or that we are expected to work with on a daily basis, right? I think we have another question there, Danae.
Yes, and Michelle has her hands up, and we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah,
Michelle, come on in.
Yeah.
So what I'm finding, and one of the reasons that I, wanted to hop just beyond this is see what resources are out. Because what I'm finding is we have children who are, at risk of being trafficked. They're kind of, getting more drawn into this life just with their behaviors. Yep. And not finding the intensive supports that specialize in addressing these behaviors and traumas before we're fully into this trafficked life.
Yep.
So I don't know if anyone has some additional resources. I saw the CSEC list, but because I'm specifically dealing with a couple right now in AAP where we're looking at residential programs out of state because the RAP provider, there's very limited RAP providers, oddly, in San Diego County. And the ones that have been tried before hasn't been successful in addressing these deeply rooted, sexualized behaviors mixed with very high mental health needs, the bipolar disorder, RAD, ODD, some of the real trauma-seeded fetal alcohol, ones that we can't get into regional center because they don't recognize it as that strong, like, developmental thing, but there's still stuff going on as to like how we can support these families to keep our children in their home, but being able to keep children, like the other children, safe. I mean, I think that's kind of why I hopped on this, of like, what resources are out there, or what can like be provided to these families so that we're able to keep these family units. We're not putting more children in foster care because it's through no fault of, like, you know, their adoptive parents. It's stuff that's happened, you know, that nature versus nurture, that, you know, they've had, you know, trauma changes DNA. They've done that. Trauma changes your brain wiring, trauma in utero. So it's nothing that's done in the home. They're provided like everything that they can possibly do, but there's just not that resource there that we're able to keep our children safe.
So to my knowledge, it's very county by county specific as far as the resources that are available. I know in the past, I believe they still do it, but CDSS does a community plan where certain classifications of youth, definitely in the foster system, and there's a few other classifications, they get scanned to be either are they CSEC or at risk for CSEC. And I would encourage you, and maybe we have links to those resources, but it is very, very community based to my knowledge. Any other questions before I pick on another volunteer?
Yes, we had one for the prior oh my gosh, what were you going through? Scenario.
Yep.
And Laura asked, I would want to know if she has been involved with drugs and a level of use or dependency to further assess needs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we have, so there's kind of, in my research, it's kind of interesting in that horrid, fascinating way about how traffickers utilize chemical dependency. That chemical dependency that I've seen tactically used by traffickers can be twofold. One, it's in order to maintain reliance because the trafficker is the source for whatever that chemical may be. But also, certain traffickers will use certain combinations of drugs because it will lower the inhibitions of their victims so that they can continue to work and sleep with more buyers. And so it's not only it's a twofold tactical application of these of drugs. It's one, it's to maintain dependency on the person as a source, but then also the way that it affects the victim, the survivor, so that they can continue to work and be profitable for that trafficker. So that's a great question. What were the drugs? How were they used? So that way we can design a way to, or better be informed on how to help you transition off of that chemical dependency. Any other questions? All right, Annabelle, help me out with scenario 2 here. Annabelle, you hear me?
Which one? I'm wondering, because some people are using my name, but I'll go ahead and read it.
Okay.
All right. An 8-year-old child from Africa was brought into the U.S. on a lawful visa as a family member of an individual entering the U.S. to work at a university. In truth, she is not related in any way. She was promised an education. Instead, once she arrived, she was treated differently from the other children of the family. She was given no education and instead was forced to work 18 hours a day inside the house where she was burned with an electrical wire and verbally abused. She endured this for 7 years and only escaped by running from the house and wandering the streets.
Okay. So we're going to go on to our analysis. Are we dealing with an adult or are we dealing with a minor?
Minor.
Okay. Are we dealing with commercial sex or labor?
Labor.
Okay. Well, what do we do now? Because we can't use the CSEC model. Do you remember what I said earlier? If we have a minor and we're talking about forced and exploited labor, we have to revert back to that full model. So we need to show all 3 elements. Okay. So what in the fact pattern would support action? Somehow they deprived or violated the person's individual rights.
So let's see. Well, she was forced to work.
Okay.
And she was coerced because she was promised an education.
Okay.
Let's see. And then let's see. Well, the torture.
Okay.
Let's see, hold on.
So for the action, we're looking at some way that they either recruited, harbored, violated someone's individual rights. So they recruited her somehow and brought her from Africa to the United States. They harbored her because she was living in their home. And you rightfully pointed out that she was promised education, but was not given education. So not coercion, but what would that be? You were promised something, but not given what you were promised.
Well, she was lied to. What?
Yeah, fraud.
Okay.
Absolutely. Force, fraud, or coercion. And then we're talking about labor. She was given no education. She was forced to work. We don't really know what kind of work, but the fact pattern says work. So on its appearance, we may be dealing with human trafficking. What questions? Obviously, other criminal activity. What questions would you like to ask this young lady or this 8-year-old child? I don't even know if we know gender in here. Yep, she. So this young lady.
She. Well, if she's had any contact with her family and just more details around like if she was forced to come, because who knows, if she's even had any contact or she was kidnapped. Let's see.
When we think about the types of services that she may need,
Mhm.
what kind of questions or what kind of discussions would you have with her?
Well, I think also medical attention. I mean, she's been wandering the streets. She's had, trauma and she's been hurt. So just, where that's at now. So she can get help, medical attention, help, mental health support, getting her to safety, how long she's been wandering the streets. I mean, I think I would attend to all the basic needs first because she's wandering and has run away.
I love that. When I talk to my prosecutor friends, one of the things that helps in a successful prosecution, the number one thing is stability. If we can help regain stability for that survivor, whatever age that survivor may be, they then are in a position to potentially help in the prosecution. But if you cannot regain stability first, it ain't going to happen. We have to regain stability, and we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those basic needs: food, water, shelter, safety, security. Those are at the top of our list. In fact, we almost need to flip that pyramid upside down, because we read top to bottom, right? So we need to focus on the issues on the top. Thank you. Excellent job. Good job. Those were just 2 snapshots. We have a few minutes left. We're gonna do one more. Let's see. Who am I gonna pick? Does anybody want to? Do I have a volunteer?
I know I'm not the only one who loves the spotlight.
Who's that? I'm gonna call on somebody. All right, Mr. Alexander. I like you, my friend.
There you go.
I like you, my friend. Help us out here. Walk us through number 3.
16-year-old woman in India is approached and recruited to work. Hold on a second. Okay, a 16-year-old woman is in India approached and recruited to work in an American household doing domestic labor. She is promised $1,000 a week and a 40-hour work week. The young woman discusses the opportunity with her family and she decides to go. She enters the U.S. on a tourist visa. When she arrives, her documents are taken for safekeeping. She is told she is not allowed to leave the house unless her employers or a married couple with 2 small children are with her. She performs childcare for the couple and works 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. She is paid $400 a week because her housing and food cost $600 per week. Yikes.
All right, so before you jump in, all 3 of these cases were real cases in California. This one was taken directly from a case in Walnut Creek, Bay Area, in 2012. All right, are we dealing with an adult or a minor, sir? Do you remember? Here we go. Adult or a minor?
I want to say she's a minor.
Yep, 16 years old. Are we dealing commercial sex or labor?
Labor.
Okay. So we can't use the CSEC model.
No, sir.
What model do we use? We use the full one, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we need to find an action and a means and a purpose. All right. Let's go back to the fact pattern because there's a lot here. All right, the first one, action. What are some of the actions that the trafficker employed to either recruit, harbor, transport, or entice our victim?
Well, she was recruited to, she was basically offered a job, right?
Yep.
So she was offered, so recruited. She was promised. So, and as we're reading it, it seemed like those promises were not honored. So I'm looking at deceit. She lied to.
Yes.
She was aroused, document taken for safekeeping. She was told she couldn't leave the house, so she was kind of restricted. So she was, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but she was restricted, so she couldn't leave unless she was with, the couple. And she's overworked, clearly.
So what questions, if this was your patient, your client, you were helping this young woman, in the real world, her name was Priya. What would you ask Priya?
Well, for me personally, because I would start with the fact that she's a 16-year-old woman. So I'm definitely going to approach it with someone who looks like her, so I'm going to bring another woman in there with me, right? Because I want to make sure she's feeling safe and understand that I'm open arms, not turned away. So I would have as much support for me for her. And then I would ask her, has she had any contact with family members? Has she had any way of having any kind of outside contact besides what she has right now? I would it's a lot because 16, I'm a father first. I'd be nuts right now. So I definitely have to lean on my counterpartner who's a woman to help me through it, because I would probably lose my mind there. So I want to be honest with that. So but I would definitely ask her, does she know what all she knows about where she's at? What else has been told her? Because I'm quite sure she has other information that she's either overheard or she knows because of just kind of being around the house and hearing different conversations. Ask about the married couple, her environment in there, the two small children. What does that look like in there for her? How is she providing for herself with the money she's getting? What is that used for? Is it given to her? How is she going on navigating that? How is she living for herself?
Roderick, I love your transparency. I love that we don't know, right? And this is often what happens with, us as wraparound team members and working alongside youth and families. And we find out mid, sometimes service that this is going on. And I wouldn't know what to do either. And I've been doing the work for almost 20 years. And what you're saying, asking all the questions and who to lean into, is exactly the right thing, because that's what's going to get us to the right place. So I do appreciate you being very transparent about that. That makes my heart very happy.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that in the sense that in those open arms, we also need people that are culturally aware, because in the fact pattern, I specifically put in there that she's from India and that she had discussed with her family before accepting this job. So to what extent do we have a caste issue here that we need to address? And is that something that is outside of your knowledge base? Do you need to bring in other people that are smarter on that topic? I bring in smart people all the time on stuff that I don't know about in order to have those meaningful but sensitive conversations. So I love that. That was a great intro there, or a great.
Would it be wrong to ask her what her in one of those questions, to ask her what was her parents' impression about what this looks like? Are they all on the same page, right? Because clearly it's been deceit, but what were her parents told? Because we go back, I see opportunities. So clearly I don't know for a fact, but if she's coming over here to work and things like that, I'm quite sure her goal was to send her mom and dad funds and things like that to help back at home. So what does that look like? What were they told this is supposed to look like, right? Yeah, and then I'll probably get my other partner I'll probably have to walk out the room already. I'll be over. I couldn't deal.
Fair point. Another couple other points when we talk about victims that are foreign nationals and we're talking about labor. The way that people interact with employment around the world is very different than the way that we interact with employment here in the United States. It is very common in other parts of the world, and it is legal and culturally accepted, that you pay somebody to find you a job. You will pay a recruiter significant amounts of money, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to find you a job, and then you pay them off out of your earnings. Here in the United States, that is illegal. So when we're dealing with foreign nationals, they may have these labor recruitment fees that they're paying off that are absolutely normal in their home country, but is a crime here in the United States. With those labor recruiters internationally, it's very common for that recruiter to hold passports because they have a financial investment of keeping that person on the job site. here in the United States, that is potentially a crime to hold someone else's identification documents. And so there are things that, especially again, when we're dealing with victims that are foreign nationals, that they don't see as abnormal because it is commonplace in their home country, are very much red flags or potential indicators of exploitation here in the US. I think we had a question in the chat, Donna. What do we got? You're on mute.
Oh, it's like I'm new or something. Stephanie says, some additional thoughts, asking about possible injuries, any medical care. Is she being threatened? Does she know other people being forced, restricted, exploited in any other way?
No, that's
and
great.
I did see somebody's hand up a minute ago, and I don't know if we got to them.
Hi, my name's Amanda. No, I was just going to ask a question, as an attorney, would that be possible to even go in with this family and talk about how that's not an appropriate living wage? There is not like overtime considered in that. Like, are those things we look at too? Or I'm saying we, but you.
Yeah, no, yes, those are things. Labor trafficking is very much a spectrum crime. You have labor violations, labor exploitation, and then labor trafficking. And as you progress down the severity of like a violation, I didn't get a lunch break, or my employer didn't give me a hard hat, that's like a violation. Exploitation starts to get more serious, more physical in the damage. And then of course, on the end of the spectrum is trafficking. And there's no clear line when you graduate from one to the next to the next. So it varies, very fact specific. In fact, I'm not spilling any secrets here. I was talking to a district attorney friend of mine from LA County, and they are working on a forced and exploited labor case right now with about potential of about 100 victims that are helping to clean up after the wildfires in Los Angeles County. And they're building a case against a particular contractor. So, and it's very, very fact specific. They're working with Cal OSHA to understand what is the PPE that the employer is supposed to be providing. And so I will also say that that is not a conversation you have on day one. That is something after you have provided those basic needs and built some of that rapport with that survivor.
We have 8 minutes left. What I do want to do now before with the rest of our time, while Ben is finishing up and taking the rest of your questions, James is going to drop our evaluation poll. Please take a moment to fill this out. We absolutely read and go over your feedback to not only improve, but what are your suggestions for next time, and what can we do better, and what do you appreciate? So please, please, please fill that out and let us know how we're doing. We do read them. We want your feedback. And with that, I will give the floor back to James, or not James, to Ben in just a quick second. This is getting recorded. You will find it on our website in the next week or two with all of the PDF versions of the documents that have been dropped throughout the entire session. We've got the PDF version of Ben's materials, our RCFFP resource and course document. Also, the Human Trafficking Unit at CDSS provided a resource document with links and classes. So all of that will be available to you. And with that, I will pass it back over to Ben to bring us home.
No, that's great. And again, I want to thank UC Davis for giving us this space here. This really was designed kind of as an overview of human trafficking. And obviously, hopefully, through our discussion, you kind of understand how complex and nuanced this is. We're dealing with individuals, and people are highly complex. Everyone's different. Everyone's built different. Everyone sees and experiences the world different. So it's a challenge for us to one, figure out how to support them, but then also, hold their traffickers accountable. I covered a lot of ground. Are there any outstanding questions, clarification, something that I said that didn't make sense? Any or just general thoughts on the topic that we discussed for the last couple hours?
I have one. You mentioned restitution earlier.
Yes.
If you could, like, from a legal standpoint, give some advice on that. If we have a client going through that process right now and like speaking with an FBI representative and all of that, is there anything that should be highlighted in that narrative for them to access the most restitution possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just, so you're obviously working through that process right now with a particular client? All right. Danae, I would love to connect with Katie afterwards. I've done a fair amount of legal research on this. So restitution is the legal way that the victim is made whole, right? Monetarily made whole. In California, if the trafficker is prosecuted under 236.1, our penal code has 4 different calculations on how to calculate the value of the stolen wage if we're dealing with forced labor. And the code directs the court to pick the one that gets the greatest amount of money. The court doesn't just pick whichever one they're comfortable with. They have to pick the one that has the highest return. What's frustrating is if we're dealing with a victim of commercial sex, I've had way too many prosecutors go, oh, well, buying sex is illegal, so it has no value. And so I get really frustrated because the statute, the law's intent is to find a way to compensate the victim. And so I would love to speak with that prosecutor because there are other ways to value that victim's time. And it may be suspicious, but escort services technically are legal. They may be dubious, but technically are legal. And those have value. So there are ways to try to value whatever the harm was or whatever the value of the time or labor that was taken from that victim. If it's a federal case, it's a little different. Their laws are a little different. But I'd love to connect with you after the. I'm huge on this. I think restitution is a massively untapped area of the law that we can really make it hurt the trafficker to take their money away, because that's the whole point of this crime. It's also power and control, but it's really in order to extract value from another person.
Okay, thanks. I'll email you.
Yes, please do.
I did drop Ben's email in the chat. If you have any further questions around any of the information that was presented today, please shoot him a line over there at his btgreer@ucdavis.edu. We did drop the resource guide, our course guide, the PDF of the PowerPoint. And I would like to take a minute to thank our partners at the California Department of Social Services Family Centered Practice Unit, particularly Chris Petty and Kayla Granderson for being my partners here today, and also the Child Trafficking Unit over at CDSS, who provided all of those amazing resources and courses as well. Ben, you are a wealth of knowledge. We will absolutely lean in and tap into you again. Please look out for anything that is coming down the pipe. I know that Northern Academy is working on a trafficking course around our tribal population, if I'm not correct. Yes, so look for that. And all of our courses are free to our participants. So please, 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 all you got to do is set up a registration, go in there, and you are able to take classes. So I want to give you all of those resources. Again, thank you all for your participation, your feedback, your questions. That absolutely made today's session that much more valuable and informative. We appreciate you over here at the Resource Center, and we will see you again next time. With that, have a great Friday and an amazing weekend, and stay cool out there, friends.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for all the hard work that you guys are doing out there supporting these survivors. So thank you, guys.
Absolutely. See you in the sandbox.